You want to know something most people never talk about? Across the country, right now, countless men are sitting in absolute silence. Not because they're calm, not because they don't care, but because saying even one wrong sentence might turn a small disagreement into a full-scale emotional storm. So they sit there, quiet, careful, bracing themselves, trying to figure out how a conversation about something small, something simple, suddenly became a referendum on their character. And here's the part that cuts deepest. These men are not bad partners. They've tried, they've listened, they've apologized, they've carried more weight than anyone sees, yet they still end up painted as the problem, the villain, the one who doesn't get it. After enough cycles of this, something inside a man shifts, not loudly, not explosively, quietly. A sentence forms that feels like both relief and defeat. I can't keep doing this. Society loves to ask why men pull away, why they go silent, why they stop trying. But almost no one asks what pushed them into that silence in the first place. What made them give up on conversations that never lead anywhere? What made them walk on eggshells in their own home? What made them feel like the only way to keep the peace was to lose themselves? And that's where this story begins, with the quiet breaking point almost every man reaches, but very few ever admit out loud. Here's where things start to unravel for a lot of men. They walk into a conversation thinking they're addressing one clear issue, something practical, something fixable. Maybe it's money. Maybe it's a plan for the weekend. Maybe it's a comment that landed the wrong way. They think they're having a normal adult discussion, two people trying to understand each other. But the moment they try to stay on track, the ground shifts. A conversation that began with a simple question suddenly jumps to something from last month, then to something from last year, then to a tone they must have meant, then to a feeling they should have noticed. Before a man even realizes what happened, the original topic is gone, replaced by a tangled web of past moments, emotional interpretations, and shifting expectations. And he's standing there, confused, trying to chase every new point while losing the thread of the actual issue. Many men describe this moment the same way. It felt like the conversation was moving faster than I could think. Not because they're slow, not because they don't care, but because the discussion stopped being a discussion. It became a maze. Every turn leads somewhere new. Every answer creates another accusation. And the more he tries to bring things back to logic, the more he gets told he's missing the point. This is the point where frustration turns into helplessness. When a man realizes he's no longer solving a problem, he's being pulled into an emotional vortex where clarity doesn't survive. And after enough nights like this, the pattern becomes obvious. The argument never stays where it starts. For many men, this is the moment they begin to question the entire dynamic. Not because they want to win, but because they can't even figure out what they're fighting about anymore. Once a man finds himself trapped in a conversation that keeps shifting, something else almost always enters the mix. Emotion arriving at the exact moment clarity is about to land. It doesn't matter who it comes from or what triggered it, but the pattern hits the same. When he finally forms a reasonable point, when he's calm, measured, and trying to be honest, suddenly the emotional intensity spikes. Tears, anger, hurt, confusion, a wave of feeling powerful enough to wipe out the logic he was trying to bring to the table. And here's the part that throws men off balance. They were raised to treat emotion as truth, to stop what they're saying, to comfort first, question later, to abandon their point the moment someone else appears overwhelmed. So they freeze. They soften their voice. They step back from the conversation to make space for the feelings in the room. And without realizing it, they lose the only clarity they had. This is where men start slipping into a role they never agreed to play. They become responsible not only for the issue being discussed, but for the entire emotional climate surrounding it. They become the regulator, the buffer, the one who must calm everything down, even if they are the one hurting. Over time, this teaches them a dangerous lesson: their own feelings must be pushed aside if someone else is feeling more intensely. That's how simple problems turn into emotional storms. That's how accountability disappears. That's how communication slowly becomes one-sided. And that's how a man learns to stay quiet, not because he wants to be distant, but because he's tired of watching every attempt at honesty dissolve the moment emotion enters the room. Eventually, he stops bringing things up at all, not because he's checked out, not yet, but because he's learned that every attempt at clarity gets drowned out by a stronger current he can't compete with. And when a man feels that speaking leads nowhere, he doesn't shout. He withdraws, not physically, not immediately, but mentally, quietly, one conversation at a time. That withdrawal is the beginning of something deeper, a shift that will shape everything that comes next. As men pull back from conversations that never stay on one track, something else starts to surface, an uncomfortable realization that clarity itself seems to trigger resistance. The more a man tries to be specific, the more he tries to stay grounded in what actually happened. The faster the discussion slips away from facts and into a new emotional landscape. It's almost as if clarity threatens the entire dynamic. Many men describe the same pattern. When they ask direct questions, the topic suddenly changes. When they try to separate facts from feelings, the conversation shifts into hurt or anger. When they attempt to resolve the original issue, a new accusation appears. And every time they try to circle back to the actual point, they're told they're being dismissive or insensitive, so they learn something quietly, something they don't want to admit out loud. Clarity isn't welcome, because clarity leads to accountability. And accountability real? Balanced accountability requires both people to look at their part in the conflict. When one person refuses to do that, the entire structure of the conversation becomes built on distraction instead of resolution. This is the stage where men start questioning themselves. They wonder if they're overreacting. They wonder if they're too logical. They wonder if they're expecting too much by wanting a straightforward answer. But deep down, they know what's happening. They can feel the shift. The discussions aren't about fixing problems anymore. They're about avoiding them. And once a man senses that clarity consistently creates conflict, he stops trying to bring clarity at all. Not because he's weak, but because he's tired of walking into conversations where truth feels like a threat, and honesty becomes a liability. This is the turning point where exhaustion begins replacing effort, and where quiet frustration starts turning into quiet distance. By the time a man realizes that clarity sparks pushback, something heavier begins settling on his shoulders. He becomes the emotional buffer in the relationship, sometimes slowly, sometimes all at once. And it doesn't happen because he chooses that role. It happens because every attempt at honesty leads to emotional fallout he ends up managing alone. At first, he tries to balance things. He stays patient. He softens his tone. He tries to avoid making anyone feel attacked. But the pattern keeps growing. A simple question becomes a personal offense. A concern becomes a criticism. A boundary becomes a betrayal. So he adjusts, again and again and again. Before long, he's carrying the emotional weight for two people. He is the one calming, the one soothing, the one absorbing every spike of intensity. His own emotions get pushed further and further to the background, not because they're less real, but because they're treated as less important. This is where many men begin to feel something they rarely admit: their feelings only matter when they're useful, not when they're honest. Their frustration is labeled anger. Their disappointment is called negativity. Their hurt is dismissed as overreacting. Yet they're expected to stay steady, patient, and composed no matter what comes their way. Living like this changes a man. It shrinks him. He stops sharing his needs. He stops setting boundaries. He stops speaking up when something hurts, not because he wants to be distant, but because he's learned that expressing his reality only creates more chaos for him to clean up. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, he becomes an emotional shield protecting everyone but himself. This is the stage where men stop feeling like partners and start feeling like caretakers of someone else's feelings. And that shift, once it happens, is nearly impossible to ignore. When a man becomes the emotional shield long enough, something subtle but powerful begins to erode inside him, his confidence. Not the loud kind that shows up at work or in public, the private kind. The kind that comes from knowing he can speak honestly without being punished for it. At first, he barely notices the shift. He just hesitates more. He rephrases himself. He double-checks whether a simple opinion might set something off. He thinks twice before asking a question. He weighs every word as if he's walking through a room full of tripwires. And over time, that caution becomes instinct. Men describe this stage in painfully similar ways. They say they feel like they're always on guard. They say they rehearse conversations in their heads before speaking. They say they're afraid of being misunderstood even when their intentions are good. They say they no longer trust themselves to communicate without causing conflict. It's not fear of the other person, it's fear of the reaction. And when this pattern repeats long enough, the man who once spoke freely now measures every syllable. The man who once led confidently now second-guesses himself at home. The man who once solved problems now feels like the problem. Not because he actually changed, but because he learned that his voice, his needs, and his emotions always create a cost. This is the point where silence becomes easier than honesty. Not because he wants distance, but because honesty has become exhausting. Every conversation feels like a test he didn't agree to take. Every disagreement feels like a trap he can't escape. And every attempt to communicate feels like proof that he should have stayed quiet in the first place. When a man reaches this stage, he isn't just tired, he's drained. He starts retreating, not emotionally but psychologically, preserving the last pieces of himself that haven't been worn down. And once that withdrawal begins, the relationship is no longer growing. It's slowly collapsing from the inside. By the time a man's confidence has quietly worn down, he starts to notice something he tried for a long time to ignore. The goalposts keep moving. No matter how careful he speaks, no matter how calm he stays, no matter how much effort he puts into understanding, the standard always shifts. What was acceptable yesterday becomes offensive today. What solved the conflict last week suddenly isn't enough. What he apologized for once becomes something he's expected to apologize for again. This is where men begin to understand a harsh truth: they've been playing a game without rules. A game where expectations appear out of nowhere. A game where new emotional debts get created faster than he can repay them. A game where he's responsible for outcomes he can't control and feelings he never caused. And a game where winning isn't possible, because the moment he gets close, the terms change. Men describe this stage not with anger, but with confusion. They feel like they're constantly missing something, even when they're giving everything. They feel like the relationship has turned into a moving target they can't track. They feel like every attempt to improve only opens the door to more criticism. And slowly, they begin to understand that the problem isn't their effort, it's the system they're operating in. That's when perspective shifts. He stops asking, "How can I fix this?" and starts asking, "Why am I the only one trying?" That question hits differently. It cuts through guilt, through self-doubt, through the belief that he's always the one falling short. It forces him to see the imbalance. It forces him to see the pattern. It forces him to recognize that he's not failing, he's being drained. And once a man sees that the game has no rules, he stops trying to win it. Not because he's given up on love, but because he's done sacrificing himself for a dynamic that refuses to change. Once a man realizes he's been playing a game without rules, something surprising happens. Staying starts to feel more frightening than leaving. For years, he was told the opposite. He was warned that being alone is failure, that not being in a relationship means something is wrong with him, that a man without a partner is incomplete. So he stayed, even when it hurt, even when it drained him. But when the pattern becomes undeniable, he starts to test the one thing he's been taught to fear: distance. Maybe at first it's just mental. He stops over-explaining himself. He stops volunteering for every emotional crisis. He stops trying to fix what clearly doesn't want to be fixed. Then it becomes physical. He spends more time at the gym, more time with friends, more time in his own space, where he doesn't have to calculate every word. And in that space, he feels something he almost forgot existed: relief. No arguments about nothing. No walking on eggshells. No late-night debates that go in circles. No constant pressure to anticipate someone else's reaction. Just quiet. Just breathing. Just being. It's in that quiet that an uncomfortable question surfaces. If I feel this much better, from the chaos, what exactly was I holding on to? This is where the narrative flips. Leaving no longer looks like losing. It looks like regaining oxygen. It looks like stepping out of a storm he thought was normal. It looks less like abandonment and more like self-respect. He hasn't fully detached yet, but the fear is fading. The spell is breaking. And for the first time, the idea of choosing his own well-being doesn't feel selfish. It feels sane. That's the bridge to what comes next, not just stepping back from a broken dynamic, but redefining what he actually wants his life to feel like. When a man finally accepts that the game has no rules, something deeper begins to change inside him. At first, it feels like resignation. Then it feels like distance. But eventually, it turns into something far more powerful: clarity about what actually matters to him. For most of his life, he was taught that relationships define his worth, that being a good man means holding everything together, no matter the cost. That discomfort is noble. That self-sacrifice is admirable. That his role is to be steady while everyone else is emotional. Approval was the currency he didn't realize he was chasing. But after enough cycles of confusion, blame, and emotional overload, something breaks free. He no longer seeks validation for his effort. He no longer craves recognition for what he's held in. He no longer measures his value by how well he absorbs someone else's storms. Instead, he starts craving something simpler, something he hasn't felt in a long time. Peace. It starts small. Maybe he enjoys the quiet more than usual. Maybe he feels relief when he's alone. Maybe he notices how calm his body feels when he doesn't have to analyze every word. And that calm begins to spread. It becomes a new reference point, a baseline, a truth his mind keeps returning to. And the more he tastes that peace, the more he realizes how little approval ever gave him. Approval came with conditions. Approval could be taken away. Approval kept him walking on eggshells. But peace, real, stable peace, asks for nothing. It simply exists. And standing next to that feeling, he finally sees how exhausted he's been for years. This is the moment when the internal shift becomes irreversible. Not because he hates anyone, not because he's running from connection, but because he understands, maybe for the first time, that his well-being cannot survive in a place where chaos is the price of staying. And once a man realizes his peace matters more than someone's approval, the entire dynamic of his life begins to change. When a man finally understands that peace feels better than winning an argument, better than being right, and far better than chasing approval that never lasts, something inside him settles. He doesn't explode. He doesn't make threats. He simply chooses himself quietly, firmly, and without apology. And that choice becomes the line he never knew he needed, because he can see it clearly now. All those years of softening his voice, shrinking his needs, and carrying emotions that weren't his to carry didn't make the relationship stronger. They only made him disappear. Choosing himself isn't abandonment. It's survival. It's the moment he stops trading his sanity for someone else's comfort. It's the moment he realizes that love cannot grow in places where he must lose himself to keep the peace. And once that clarity sinks in, he steps forward, not in anger, but in freedom. A man who chooses peace becomes a man who can finally breathe again. A man who can stand tall again. A man who can rebuild the parts of himself he had to hide. If you've ever felt this shift, this quiet awakening, you're not alone. Your story matters more than you think. So tell me, when did it finally click for you? When did you decide your peace was worth protecting? Share your moment below. Your voice might be the one another man needs to hear.